Quick show of hands. How many of us identify as Christian? What is a Christian? Seems like if we're going to identify as Christian, we probably ought to be able to define what that means, what that is. But the degree to which each of us are multidimensional participants in an actively dynamic culture, in an evolving world, it's tricky, can be tricky, to identify, like, what is a Christian? What is Christianity? It can be especially difficult to identify or define Christian or Christianity because there are at least two major obstacles to us being able to objectively define anything. Anything. The first of those obstacles is this. When you and I set out to try to think about anything, we bring a whole bunch of other things to mind to help us think about that thing. Yeah? We have pre-critical inclinations that guide our thinking, and that's just the way our brain works to help us understand the experience of being alive. So, for example, how many of us know what this is? Cricket, yes. How many of you, raise your hand, you just love cricket? You love it. Can't get enough. Anybody? How many of you aren't really sure because you don't really know much about cricket? That's me. I barely know a thing. I don't even know how to play. But in order for you to answer the question, do you love cricket, you had to do some digging like, well, what is it? What do I think about it? And you would find yourself answering like using other criteria like, well, for one, do I like sports? And if I like sports, then maybe I'm open. But if I don't like sports, then I'm closed before we even get there. Do I like baseball or baseball-like sports? If I love baseball, then hey, I might be open because that kind of looks like baseball. But if I dislike baseball, I probably already dislike cricket, even though I don't know what it is. Yeah? Pre-critical inclinations. These are beneath the level of consciousness. And it's the way our brain does everything. It's the way we analyze. It's the way we think about things. We bring a whole lot of other things to bear when we make decisions. Yeah? What's a Christian? Imagine how many things get summoned up as we answer that question. Like, do we like Christianity? Well, probably depends on what your pre-critical inclinations are. Those pre-critical inclinations become patterns in our way of navigating the world. We rely on the data that we've already taken in order to navigate the future. The reason that is maybe an obstacle to defining Christianity or anything else is because a lot of that stuff happens and we are not even aware that we're doing it. Now, the technical term for that phenomenon is bias. We have biases. We all have biases. It's just the way our brain processes things, and they're very helpful until they're not helpful. Do you know cricket is the number 2 or 3 most famous sport in the world? Most famous. Actually, it's number 2, and the only sport more widely watched than cricket is, guess what? Yes! Well done. God bless you. How about American football? Not even in the top 10. Badminton has more fans globally than American football. Some of you are saying, no, I don't believe that because I love football. Can't get enough. Pre-critical inclination. You see how our brains work? Now, there are a bunch of these pre-critical inclinations, and I'm going to need some helpers here. We're going to talk about these a little bit this morning because this is really important. When I ask you what is Christianity or what is a Christian, which many of you identified that you are, I want us to become aware of what's informing us and how we answer that question. Because there's a bunch of stuff in your head that's helping you answer that question that you may not even be aware of. So, Lowers, Fars, can you help me pass out some handouts here? Thank you so much. Why don't you take those and just bring me the rest when you're done. Pass out this. And Ken, why don't you start like in this row? Ken will get there. Grant, if you'll start maybe in the back and go this way. And Eden, if you'll start up here. Here, Grant, I've changed the plan. Yeah, you go this way and start that way. And you go this way and go that way. Excellent. Thank you so much. So as these coming around, I want to introduce just a couple of biases that will probably ring true to you. Biases. So next slide. One of the obstacles that, one of the biases that are probably most familiar is our confirmation bias. Let's read this out loud together, shall we? Confirmation bias is the human brain welcomes information that confirms what it already thinks and resists information that disturbs or contradicts what it already thinks. How many of you believe me that badminton is more popular than American football in the globe? Yeah, you don't like it, do you? Badminton, what a foolish, silly game. And yet, the fact remains no matter what we think. Thank you so much. Confirmation bias. How many times have I put up on this screen Epictetus quote, "You can teach a person anything except that which they think they already know," right? Epictetus. You have some things, and I have some things in our heads that are probably not negotiable. Even when we come to a place where we're explicitly interacting with the God of the universe that transcends all boundaries, my hunch is the boundaries of the things in our head that we already think we know are the hardest to penetrate for God. Confirmation bias is so strong. The things we know, right? All right, another bias that's pretty common among us, complexity bias, and that is the human brain prefers a simple lie to a complex truth. It's just more efficient. Our brain is a very efficient organ, and it wants to find the truth as quick as it can, so we'll gravitate towards something simple at the expense of truth, often, right? Just keep it simple, preacher. Don't make this hard. Just give me 3 points, and let me out of here, and I'll feel good. Another bias. The community bias. The human brain finds it very hard to see something that your group doesn't want you to see. We put tribe over truth. The clearest example I can think about here with this lately is what I observed over the last 2 years about mask wearing. Many people I saw were much more inclined to take their cue about wearing masks from what their tribe was doing than to what other kinds of evidence may come up about whether or not it was helpful or not. Tribe over truth. So when I say what is Christianity or what is a Christian, we got all these biases going on with us, all of these things that are pre-critical inclinations that are helping us decide, like, what is Christianity? What is a Christian? You've been told some things along the way. Well, I've given you this, one more bias, the comfort bias. That's the last one on your page. And that is, our brains welcome data that allows us to relax and be happy, but our brains reject data that requires us to adjust or work or inconvenience ourselves. If I tell you you need to be different, what's your first response? Oh, you don't tell me I need to be different. You don't tell me anything. These are just the patterns that our brain maintains to interpret reality. So these are all happening inside of all of us. Some of you say, no, they don't happen inside of me, preacher. I don't know. Confirmation bias. So there's a whole bunch of them there. These are 10, I think, or 11 that I gave you here. But that's just one obstacle. Actually, I'm reminded of a quote, of an old Latin phrase from about the 1200s. And this was an understanding that helped shape medieval Christianity, was this awareness that you and I are able to receive information as per our own biases. That's how able we are to receive new information, is dependent upon the pre-critical inclinations that we already have in our heads. So the Latin phrase here, it's to the bottom of your page. I don't know how to say it in Latin, but it's information is received according to the manner of the recipient or the receiver. So sometimes I offer up a teaching in here, and I'll go to the afterwards, we'll dismiss, and someone will come up to me and say, "That was the worst lesson I've ever heard you give." And in the same day, someone will say, "I can't believe it was just like you were dripping honey from the Spirit right out of your mouth this morning." That's usually what everybody says, but sometimes people say the other thing. Information, ideas are received according to the manner of the receiver. So today what I want us to do is look at the receiver and be as honest as we can muster in thinking about, what is a Christian? I just said I was one, and I am one. What does that mean? That kind of leads us to this second obstacle. The second obstacle is this word that I learned this week called polysemy. Anybody know what that is? It's being married to more than one definition, we'll say. Semantics. You know the word semantic? So multiple words, multiple definitions. Anytime something has multiple definitions, we can say it's polysemous. That's a good word, isn't it? Say polysemous. That's new to me. It wasn't in my vocabulary. So I had to work to open up space to allow this new idea to come into me this week. Polysemy. Something can have more than one definition. Now, a neutral idea, the example of this is the word bright. The word bright can mean multiple things, right? It can talk about a light, meaning shining lots of radiance, but it can also mean a person. Jeff's a pretty bright guy, meaning he's intelligent. It can mean two different things, multiple definitions, and Christianity is not one thing. Christianity is a lot of things, and has always been a lot of things, and it keeps evolving. So flip your page over to the other side. A Christian is, and here's just some definitions or explanations about what Christianity, or what a Christian is, or what Christianity is. To be a Christian is to inhabit a cultural or historical tradition. How many of you were just born into Christianity? It's your family heritage. That's the way some people define. It's a tradition thing. It's a heritage thing. If you're born in America, some would assume that you're a Christian just because you were born in this nation. One way of defining it. Another way is what we might consider a doctrinal way of defining Christianity. That is, that Christianity is a set of beliefs, things we have in our head. To be a Christian is to affirm a system of beliefs or teachings. That's a doctrinal definition of what Christianity is. And for the person who thinks that Christianity is a heritage, to be told that no, it's actually a set of beliefs. Those two things are not the same, right? I might be inclined to interpret it one way, or I might have never even heard that I have to believe some things because I was born in America. I was a Christian at birth. And I may not know that there are some ideas that go along with that, yeah? Moving on down to the number 6 on your page, we might define Christianity as a moralistic undertaking. That is, that there's a set of shared values. So to be a Christian is to affirm a system of beliefs or teachings. I'm sorry, that was the doctrinal one. To be a Christian is to live your life by a moral or ethical framework. That has more to do with how we function and how we behave and how we make decisions in the world, right? That's different than being born in America, and it's different than believing some things. It has to do with the framework of how we do lives. Let's look at the 9th one on the page down there. This is maybe what you might consider a political definition. That is, Christianity is a way of organizing people. To be a Christian is to act as part of a coalition with shared theopolitical aims. I see this everywhere right now. That to be a Christian is to vote a certain way or to align yourselves with certain cultural issues. Sometimes those issues become the only thing, and I can name 10 probably. And it's this thing, and if you're wrong on this thing, then you can't be Christian. In fact, that seems to be said a lot. How can you possibly call yourself a Christian and still believe in whatever? I think Jesus said about that, you strain out a gnat while you swallow a camel. If that's the way you make your decisions about what Christianity is, yeah? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a few moments, and now we're going to reflect together. We're going to unpack this a little bit together. So I want us to reflect and connect. So find a partner. We're going to talk a couple of minutes, and Laura's going to help us with a little support music. And here's what I want you to do. Let's all just stand up for a moment if we can. And you're free to move, but I want you to be connected to someone that you can talk to with whom you can be honest. And when I say honest, I know that is really a foreign notion for some of us when we come to church. Because when we come to church, we may be inclined to pretend more than we pretend anywhere else in our whole world. When we come to church, we talk different. We don't tell the same jokes. We don't wear the same clothes. We don't behave the same way. We act like we're maybe nicer than we are. So don't do that, okay? I want us to talk to someone with whom we can be kind of maybe a teeny bit vulnerable. We're a community. And here's what I want you to do. By yourself alone, I want you to identify one of the biases on the page that you might do well to become more aware of. You don't have to confess that. Just by yourself, you and the Spirit recognize, oh, this is one I didn't even realize this was going on with me, but I need to know that. I just want you to take a minute or less to do that. And then second, I want you to identify what has Christianity been for you on that page of definitions. Which ones have been true for you in terms of defining Christianity? And my guess is there's probably multiple that you would identify as like, yeah, this is how I've defined Christianity. And sometimes they might even conflict with each other, and that's okay. Right, we're going to give you about 2.5 minutes to talk to each other. So feel free to move if you'd like, but let's talk. Go. Very good. These are conversations I hope you'll continue over lunch and over the course of this week. Feel free to have a seat wherever you are. You can stay beside the person. We're going to talk a little bit more with each other in a moment or two. Did anybody bump into the phenomenon where somebody else had leaned into definitions of Christianity that are slightly different than the ones that resonated most with you? It wasn't a right or wrong thing. It's just a matter of like, oh yeah, I never actually thought about Christianity that way, and that seems to be the main way for you. It leads me to this. To define Christianity, it may be better to explain that Christianity is a dialogue of a lot of things, rather than a single definition that matches the one you like best. Some of us were raised in traditions that said something like this: you are the only people that have it right. So we should pray for the Presbyterians that they get salvation. We should pray for the Catholics because they're not even going to heaven. And you were taught that you're the only one who has this right. And what I want to suggest is there's a lot of people who think that aren't us. We'll do better if we can recognize that we have things to learn from the ways other people have experienced Christianity, rather than putting ourselves above them as if we're better than others. Okay? So defining Christianity, it may be more helpful and productive if we can recognize, oh, this is a dialogue. There are a lot of different understandings and notions of what being a Christian is. Some of them I resist very strongly. The KKK defined themselves as Christian 100 years ago. The Nazis in Germany and other Christian nationalists have defined themselves as Christian. And I resist that. And my rationale is because it doesn't seem consistent with Jesus to me. Now, you may see it differently. That's just my confession. If defining Christian is a dialogue, what I hope to do is get Jesus in the conversation with us. The Jesus of the New Testament, the Jesus of Nazareth, the humble guy from Nazareth, I want him in the conversation as we're going to define Christianity, because it seems to me there's a lot of people defining Christianity under terms that don't really involve Jesus very much. So for the last 3 weeks, we've been trying to get Christianity redefined in terms of Jesus, or re-Jesusing our ideas about Christianity in the church using this fantastic book by Alan Hirsch and Michael Frost. So we've been kind of allowing them to prompt our thinking. I have several copies of this book. I've given out some. If you're interested, let me know. I want Jesus in the conversation at least. I really would like for him to become the primary voice as you and I define Christianity. We've taken his name on as the author of the movement, right? So it seems to me that anywhere it doesn't match up with Jesus, we ought to be really, really critical in our thinking and analysis to say, well, how did that ever become part of Christianity? How did that ever become how did the person even get the notion they could say that was Christian? It just isn't even close to Jesus in his posture and nature and spirit and generosity and kindness. Yeah, okay, all right, you get the point. So for the last several weeks, we've been asking 5 questions. This is part 4 of that series of asking these questions. We've been asking, what role does Jesus of the New Testament play in shaping the ethos and the self-understanding of Christianity? Throughout history, we've seen a lot of non-Jesus-y Christianity. Number 2 question is continuity required between Jesus' life and example and the life and example of his subsequent followers? Those of you who raised your hands, saying, yeah, I'm a Christian. Do we have to be like him and act like him and do like him and be like him and think like him? That's a question. Number 3, in what ways might you and I dilute Jesus, who is a pretty radical reformer in his day? How might we dilute Jesus in order to maintain a comfy and cozy Christianity and religious tradition and practice? Barbara Brown Taylor, I think, was the one who said, if people knew what God was up to when they came to church, they would wear crash helmets and wear seatbelts. Many of us aren't even open to the notion that God might do something so radical that it might disrupt us. So we come just kind of like, okay, I'll come, whatever, God. Might God do something bigger? is it true that you and I kind of dilute Jesus? We bring him down so that he conforms to our comfort and tradition of thinking. Maybe. It's a question. Number 4, how might we co-opt Jesus to support our endeavors? I think it's really tricky when I see a business that has a Christian fish on it. We're a Christian business. That's my own notion. When I see somebody advertising as a Christian business, it makes me kind of like, are you co-opting Jesus to support your endeavor? Or are you really setting up your whole business to support the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven? Which have a lot to do with widows, orphans, and aliens, and emptying yourself and following him every day. Just a different project. Who's co-opting who in this situation? And then question number 5, where we're going to hover today for the last 10 minutes or so, is how might a rediscovery of Jesus renew our discipleship? And how might it re-anchor Chestnut Grove, a fresh discovery of Jesus of Nazareth? And if it does, then here's the real tricky part. How might it reorganize our energies and our priorities as a congregation if we were looking at Jesus of Nazareth? Would we think about Sunday school the same way? Would we think about finances the same way? Would we think about worship the same way? If Jesus was the measure of it. So today, I want to explore the first half of that 5th question. How might a review or renewal of our insight, our experience with Jesus, renew our personal discipleship? And this is for those of you who have said, I'm a Christian at the beginning. So how might rediscovering Jesus change me? Okay. We've been building a list over several weeks. A list I've been calling Core Truths About Jesus. And the reason we're doing this is because we've discovered that Jesus' invitation on humanity was not to believe things, it was to be living in a certain way. Those are fundamentally different undertakings. Christians have a lot to say. If you just believe in your heart and confess with your lips, Jesus, Lord, you'll go to heaven. Something like that. And it's made it all about believing. Jesus talked very little about believing. He talked about trusting, but he often said something more. You got skin in the game. I want you to follow me. You heard Zach and Tom reading that over and over. I just went through a quick count of the New Testament, and Jesus seems to have said, follow me, something like 23 times. I actually couldn't find an example of him saying, believe this thing. He asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he said, yeah. Well, I don't know. He said, actually, the response was, I don't know, tell me. I'll believe. I'll believe whatever you say. Your way is compelling. He said, follow me, follow me, follow me, follow me, follow me, follow me. And then he goes on to say, if you don't follow me, you're not worthy to be my disciple. Found that multiple times. If you don't follow, you're not in the thing I'm doing. So it seems really important that however we define Christianity, it would have something to do with following in his way. That's what they called it, the way of being in the world. The way of seeing humans, the way of seeing what God was up to. The way. And the way produced a kind of vitality among community and a kind of blessing among society that probably hasn't ever been paralleled. That was the outcome of the way. I think it's really good for us to be in touch with what that looks like, so I want us to follow. Now, again, following is different than believing, but if for your whole life you've been taught that Christianity is about believing, then when I say following, you're probably like, your confirmation bias is sending up a red flag going, no, he's telling you something that's different than what you learned. I am telling you something different than what you learned. If you learned that Christianity was about believing certain cognitive principles or propositions, what I'm saying is that's not Christianity according to Jesus of the New Testament, who spent very little time talking about propositions and principles and a ton of time saying, hey, come with me and I'm going to show you what this looks like to be a part of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. Just watch what I do and then you do it. That's it. That's the Christianity that I see Jesus introducing in the New Testament. So if your confirmation bias went up and you said, no, I'm not open to that, I just wanted us to be aware and then maybe ask the Spirit to help you with your confirmation bias. Sometimes maybe unfamiliar, and we all have to navigate this. Okay. So participati Christi was the fancy Latin term I introduced last week about what it looks like when we participate. Jesus' idea of what the church was a group of people who were participating in the mission of God. That's what Jesus was always up to. He says, I only can do what I see my Father doing. That's healing, feeding, liberating, incorporating the relegated, those kinds of things. Participating is what you and I are doing. Now, participation, again, it's different than just believing stuff. I believe in baseball. I watched a baseball game on television yesterday, at least a couple innings of it. I believe it's there. I believe it's objectively verifiable that baseball exists. Some even think it's beautiful. But I have never played baseball. I have no experience baseballing. At best, I'm an observer or a critic or an analyst or a historian, but I have no experience of baseball, even though I believe it. Jesus was inviting us into a participatory phenomenon, not a belief construct. My experience with baseball is not very life-giving because I've never actually played. And if your whole Christianity has been built on things that you say you believe, I invite you to transcend that idea into one that looks like participation. And participation is always a reciprocal experience or undertaking. Here's what I mean. When Jesus invited all those people to follow him, there was a reciprocal process happening, and that is Jesus was often like blessing that guy or that woman and making their life different. If you follow the course of any of the disciples from the time they got called to the time of maybe Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, or the Acts, you'll find that their life became different. James and John were fishermen, but when Jesus called them, what did they do? They evolved into not being fishermen in quite the same way, didn't they? It changed them, this following process. If you look at Matthew, he was a tax collector. And when Jesus invited him to follow, he had to loosen up on the tax collecting in order to become different. And as those people walked with Jesus for all the years, at the end, they existed differently in the world, right? The same invitation is yours and mine, to exist differently in this world. It's a fundamentally different thing than just believing baseball exists. If you don't follow, you can't be my disciple. That's the whole thing, is following and participating. Participati Christi is what we talked about a little bit last week. When Jesus reciprocated, it wasn't just one way, though. Here's where it gets tricky. It wasn't just one way where Jesus invested in somebody and their lives became different. When I say different, they became conformed into Christ-likeness. They became more like Jesus through their world, right? Their life. But then here's where it intersects the bigger picture. That person then also reciprocated or shared that blessing with others. They didn't keep it all to themselves. So when Jesus invites these people to follow, they become more like Jesus each day or week or month or year or occasion. But then they encounter a woman who's bled for 13 years or however many. And then they encounter a hungry crowd of people. And what Jesus says, hey, y'all, come. Now I need you to do like me. And we're going to do some work here in bringing back this person's health or bringing back this person's hunger, or satisfying this person's hunger. The reciprocation wasn't just a one-way thing from Jesus to the people. It was always to the person and then from that person out into the world. And Jesus had the audacity to say something like this: you are going to do greater things than I even did. He said, y'all are the light of the world and the salt of the earth. And if the thing has lost its saltiness, it's good for nothing. So if we are not reciprocating, meaning receiving whatever God's laying down, and then sharing it out, I'm not sure we're Christian. Because the only examples in the scripture of Christians, they were people who were reciprocating in an ongoing participation with both God and the world. And what did Jesus say that God had said was the most important things? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. If you can get that down, you're a Christian. Even if it's not perfect. Okay, so here's what I want us to do. I want us to talk to our neighbor. a little bit because, like I said, over the last few weeks, I've been building this list of core truths about Jesus. I think if we're going to become like him, if we're going to follow him, we got to see what his example was and be more and more open to actually that following process. So I've been building this list of core truths so that we have a good picture of what Jesus was up to in this world so that we can be up to the same stuff. So number one, Jesus mediates the grace and the mercy of God to us. Jesus offers forgiveness of sins. Jesus embodies love for the world. Those are just 3 core truths I see about Jesus. So what I want you to do is talk to your neighbor about number 1. And here's what I want you to talk about for about a minute and a half. Tell a time, very briefly, about a time you received grace and mercy from God. There's one time that you can say, I know I received some grace here. I was in a bind, blah, blah, blah. And then the second question is, I want you to tell or name a time that you then reciprocated that grace and mercy to somebody else who needed it. All right? This is an example of you being Christian. A time you received it and a time you shared it. 2 minutes. Talk about being Christian right now. Ready? 2 minutes. Let's go. Let's talk. Super. All right, so quick question. Hopefully all of you could think of an example, and I know 2 minutes isn't a lot of time. But if my premise is solid, and if indeed Jesus mediates the grace and mercy of God to humanity, then what does it look like to be Christian at home? Might it look like mediating the grace and mercy of God to those with whom you live? That's one way it looks to be Christian, right? To be a vessel of grace and mercy to the people with whom you share a house. What does it look like to be a Christian at work? We're catching on. To share grace and mercy with the people with whom you work. All right, there's tricky. What does it look like to be a Christian on social media? to sting them with my best Jesus swords. No. The very idea. No, it looks like being a voice of grace and mercy in that particular gathering of humanity, doesn't it? I mean, if you're going to be like Jesus, that's what it would look like. All right, the list went on. We continued. Let's go to the next slide. The core truth, Jesus pursues the defeated, the dead, the discarded, and the demon-possessed. That's all just in one chapter, Mark 5. He did all of that. So what might that look like for us? We also would pursue those people to be with them, to help set them free, right? Okay, we don't have time to keep doing this. Jesus opposes slavery in all its forms. Anywhere someone is shackled, whether it's bad ideology about themselves or bad ideology about other people groups, anywhere somebody's stuck, Jesus is always about liberating people, right? I came to set the captives free. Okay, we don't have time to talk about this one, but here's what I do suggest. I'm going to give you some homework. Next slide. Oh, got 3 more. Jesus is a friend of sinners, not a critic. He's not the judge. He even said, I'm not the judge. He's a friend of sinners. So if we're going to be a Christian, wouldn't that mean like we're a friend to sinners? I think so. It doesn't mean we become drug partners with sinners necessarily, but we become a friend to them. Can you imagine if the whole church in the world started behaving like Christians? Oh my goodness. It would be tremendous. The whole world might be different. Jesus calls us to follow. We heard that already, but here's the last thing. This is your homework. In John chapter 9, verse 1 through 41, you're going to hear a sermon on that in a couple of weeks. It's going to be way better than any sermon I could preach. But in this little story, Jesus encounters a man born blind. And he comes to this guy, and he's been blind his whole life. And so, you know the story. Spits and puts some mud on his eyes. And then he says this, now you go wash in the pool of Siloam. He does. And he comes back and he's got his sight restored. It's a miraculous story. But everyone around gets super anxious because it's outside what they already knew. No, we've known our whole lives that guy's blind. And so they're grappling with their confirmation bias. They're spinning all sorts of weird narratives. We know this man must be a sinner because nobody heals on the Sabbath, right? It doesn't fit the rules. It's outside the lines. My confirmation bias is telling me it can't be true that this Jesus guy is doing something. His family is kind of confused. We don't know what to say. They were pretty scared they were going to get kicked out of the synagogue. So they were afraid to vocalize what they think may have really happened. See, there was this tribal loyalty to their people group, and if they took a stand outside that, they were going to get kicked out of their tribe. And so this is an example where they took tribe over truth. Even his own family. But Jesus set that guy free. And he expanded that guy's perspective, his capacity to see the world in ways the guy never dreamed. Now, you can take that literally as if it's an ophthalmology miracle, optometry miracle, ophthalmological. You can take that as an ophthalmological miracle, or you can go, oh, Jesus enabled a guy who never thought he would have the experience of yellow to see yellow, green, blue, red, orange, the whole spectrum. He never even thought he could see, and now he can see so much. It was a radical expansion of the man's perspective in addition to just the physical part of healing. How many of us are open to a radical expansion of our perspective when we dance with Jesus? No thanks, I'll stay blind. It's easier that way. Because you know, when that guy got set free, he had to learn a whole bunch of new stuff about how to navigate life. He had all of these challenges that went along with being set free. He probably had to feed himself now. He probably had to go to work every day. He could no longer sit in the things he had learned to do so well to exist. The frameworks of life with which he had become really fluent, they didn't work anymore. And he had the very hard job of being a sighted person in the world that he had never had. Sometimes when Jesus sets us free, it is very challenging to navigate the new freedom that we have. Are you open? I invite you to read John chapter 9. Look at and I just asked you some questions on that sheet you can take home, talk to your partners, your housemates, whatever. And if that's what Christianity looks like, then what are the implications for you and me and how we're going to be in this world? Are we helping people see? Okay, let me close with this. These are the 3 little lessons I learned from John chapter 9, by the way. Next slide. Jesus enlivens us against the odds. He exponentially expands our perspective, and he helps us make sense of the world. Those are the things I see in that story. There are lots more too. You take a look at it and define Christianity by that chapter, or any chapter, and we'll keep this conversation going. Let me close with this. In his 1951 masterpiece, C.S. Lewis, the great C.S. Lewis, he said that the essence of Christianity was to turn humanity into little Christs. Let's read this out loud together, shall we? It's easy to think that the church has a lot of different objects: education, building, missions, holding services. But the church exists for nothing else but to draw men, women into Christ, to make them little Christs. God became human for no other purpose but to make you and me into little Christs in this world. Can you imagine what the world would be like? A bunch of us super eager to be just like Jesus everywhere we go. Ask the question, what would Jesus do? Well, he'd probably extend grace and mercy. Probably help expand people's perspectives. He probably wouldn't be critical of sinners. He'd be a friend to them. What would it look like, church? I don't know, but I'm on board. I'm on board with him. I pray that we all might be on board, even if it means he's going to push you beyond what you think you already know. New territory. Let's pray. God, your invitation to follow, it's tough. You asked me to go places that I'm not ready to go, I'm unwilling to go, or my grandparents said I shouldn't go. You asked me to be open to you revealing new stuff, and that is just so much more complex than when I can just listen to my favorite pundit tell me how clear and simple and easy everything is. Yet, I'm going to have this audacious plea, God. Break us open. Take the scales off our eyes. And pour your Spirit into us the way we see you do. May the whole world be fresh turf for your kingdom coming. Thanks for inviting us to participate with you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.